So in today's lesson, we're going to be taking a look at the three main approaches to soloing on a blues that I feel every guitar player needs to know to feel the most freedom and just sort of completeness when approaching soloing on a blues. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. So the first main approach that everyone knows for playing over a blues is going to be the minor pentatonic scale / the blues scale. So if you look on the fretboard diagram that we got on screen there, most of you will recognize that as your minor pentatonic box pattern that everyone knows. So we're playing in the key of B flat here. We're playing a B flat blues progression, and we'll go over how that progression works because some of you may not know how the blues sequence works, so that we can understand this a little bit better. So that's what everyone gets taught. Number one is just play minor pentatonic over the whole thing. All of those notes work over the blues progression. And then the blues scale, I kind of group that with the minor pentatonic scale because it's a very slight variation of the minor pentatonic scale. We add this note right here, this E note here on, in this case, the ninth fret of the third string. And then you can also add an E note over here on the seventh fret of the fifth string. So if you add those notes in, now that particular E note, which is the flat 5, sounds very bluesy. Now, some of you who have played with this approach a lot might think, okay, that's great, but then my playing starts sounding boring and it doesn't really quite sound the same way a lot of other blues players that I hear sound. So in that case, whenever we're playing over a major blues, which in this case, we are playing over a major blues. A lot of different blues progressions are major, but you also have minor blues progressions. So if you're playing over a major blues, the sort of next level up to start thinking about is not just using the minor pentatonic scale, which, by the way, if we're looking at this from a purely theoretical perspective, the minor pentatonic scale should not work over a major chord or major blues. We're not going to get into that right now. It just sounds cool, okay? But the next approach we can take is using the major pentatonic. Now, the major pentatonic is like the minor pentatonic, except it's major. Now, let's go down here for a second so we can look at the different notes that are in these different scales. So in the minor pentatonic scale, you have B flat, D flat, E flat, and then I put in parentheses there the E because that's like our blues note that I mentioned from the blues scale. But if we didn't have that note, then we just go to F and then A flat. And that gives you, if you see there, the numbers in red, the 1, the flat 3, the 4, the flat 5, that's that blues note, the 5, and then the flat 7. So really the minor pentatonic scale is just 1, flat 3, 4, 5, flat 7, right? But B flat major pentatonic would also have 5 notes, but some different notes. So instead of B flat, D flat, E flat, F, A flat, we have B flat, C, D, F, and G. And if you look at the numbers that are underneath that, it gives us different intervals. First of all, there's the B flat, which is obviously the root, the 1. But then we get C, which is the major second. So let's actually kind of morph this, this major pentatonic scale from our minor pentatonic scale we started off with, which I think is very important for you all to understand when you're learning these things. You have to see how these approaches relate to each other so that we can blend them together seamlessly. So if we drop this note and this note, now all of a sudden, we actually have a B flat major pentatonic scale right here. So now all of a sudden, you see we had that other box before, but now we have the notes that are outlined below. B flat, C, D, F, and G. So that gives us the 1, the major second, the major third, the major sixth, and then also the fifth. I almost said major fifth. That's not correct terminology. So the 1, the 3, the 5, and the 6. So now if I play over this blues progression, I can use that over the progression, and I'm going to talk for a second about that after I play this, because you don't really want to use this over the whole entire chord progression. It depends on what chord we're on. But when we're on the 1 chord, we can use that major pentatonic. There it was on the 4 chord, and you hear that D natural doesn't sound that great on the 4 chord. Look, we're going to the 4 chord right now. Look. D natural doesn't really sound good on that 4 chord. So we're going to talk about that a little bit more in a second. But when we're on the 1 chord, it's a really, really cool sound to use that major pentatonic. And we're going to talk a little bit more about phrasing and articulation later. But one of my favorite things to do is to also like bend that F you see there on the 2nd string, bending it up to G. So from F to G, boom, 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 boom. You can hear that kind of bluesy, but at the same time majory sound. So it sounds bluesy, but it doesn't sound the same as our typical minor pentatonic scale. This is the bend I was talking about. So that's the kind of bend that I would hear also like Jimmy Page do a lot in his solos and be like, wait, why do I never get that sound in my solos? Well, it's because all I was doing is using minor pentatonic the whole entire time, and I never used any major pentatonic. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a second, because I told you that sometimes some of the notes don't work that well over some of the different chords. So with that being said, we have our minor pentatonic, that's the first approach. Our major pentatonic, that's our second approach. And then our third approach, which to me, it glues all this stuff together. And if we can understand this, then we know for a fact that we're always going to be playing notes that sound good on each of the different chords in the blues. Is dun 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 dun. That's my weird vocal version of a drum roll. Boom! Triads right there. Triads are the thing that we really, really, really need to know if we want to make sure that we're really able to play cool stuff on the blues and not start to kind of sound stale or like we're just running the same scale over and over. Of course, those of you who know what triads are, you know that they're not scales. So if you're playing triads, you can't sound like you're running a scale because you ain't playing a scale. You can't sound like you're running scales if you're not playing scales. So we're going to be talking about triads here for a second. So now, let's actually, while we're on that subject, let's talk about the actual chord progression for the blues. And I'm going to actually delete all of these notes here so that you can just simplify things here. So first of all, the first chord in the blues, in this particular case, we're in the key of B flat, but it still doesn't matter. It's a dominant 7 chord, and we treat the dominant 7 chord as the 1 chord. Now, that's something, if you've seen my other videos just talking about regular major scale theory, that's the thing that, like, in the blues that totally, like, quote unquote, breaks the rules, is a dominant chord's not really supposed to be a 1 chord, but because it sounds cool, we go, well, what if we just do that? Because it kind of sounds cool. It sounds bluesy. So let's look at the notes that are in a B flat 7 chord. So the first chord, if you go up here, is B flat 7. So let's look at the notes that are in a B flat 7 chord. It's actually B flat, D, F. So those are just the triad notes. Those are going to be the most important notes out of all the notes in the chord. But if we're looking at the 7th chord too, we're going to add the 7th, then we would also have the note A flat. And as you can see, A flat is actually part of the minor pentatonic scale. So that's the kind of weird thing about this, guys, is that the chord itself that we're playing over has 3 notes that are from major pentatonic, it has D natural, and it has F, right? B flat, D, F. But then it has this A flat, which that comes from the minor pentatonic scale. Now, that's one of the reasons, too, that it sounds so cool to have the dominant chord on the blues like that, because it's mixing these two worlds of major and minor. Okay, it's like a major chord, but it's got this little minor element, that flat 7, that A flat. So first of all, if I'm playing over that one chord in the blues, I gotta know where that triad is, and ideally also that 7th chord, so that I can play something like this. I'm just gonna skip over that. It's the 4 chord. And then you can slide into those triad notes. So that's one thing that automatically sounds bluesy too. Like sometimes I feel like when I play triads, if I just do this, that doesn't sound bluesy enough. But then all of a sudden, if you slide into that, that's adding a couple notes that are outside of the major of that triad or that 7th chord. That was adding a note from actually the major pentatonic scale. But that's where all this is going, guys, is that we want to actually be able to fluidly combine all these approaches, the major pentatonic, minor pentatonic, and then also the triads from the chords. So let's go up here. So just in the first 4 bars, you go from B flat dominant 7 to then E flat dominant 7. So if we find those notes on the guitar, E flat dominant 7 would actually be over here because it has, scroll down, E flat, G, B flat. That's our triad note. So those of you who know your major triads, you recognize that's a major triad. But then you also have that D flat there. That's that flat 7. And if we compare it to our 2 scales that we use, major pentatonic, minor pentatonic, oh, wait a second, look, same thing. There's kind of a blend of stuff going in here. There's E flat. E flat's only found in the minor pentatonic scale. There's G, that one comes from the major pentatonic scale. There's B flat, that one's obviously found in both. And then there's D flat, that one is found in the minor pentatonic scale. So that's why, going back, if you remember earlier in the lesson, I didn't want to play D natural when we got to the 4 chord, that E flat chord, because it doesn't fit with the chord. The chord has a D flat in it. It has that flat 7, which comes from the minor pentatonic scale. But if I play like a D natural next to that, it's like it clashes a lot. So that's why you have to be able to like process what chords you're on so that it can also inform what scale you want to play. If you want to play either that major pentatonic or that minor pentatonic. So I'll give you a shortcut right now. Play B flat minor pentatonic when you're on the 4 chord. And then you can play either minor pentatonic or major pentatonic when you're on the 1 chord. But once you're in the 4 chord, don't be hitting that D natural or be hitting that 3rd from the major pentatonic scale. Now, what I will say is that you can, again, this is why you got to know the triads, because you need to know these chords in and of themselves. There is a note from the major pentatonic scale that works super well, and that's the G, because it's in the chord, right? So that's why a good, like, balanced approach to this is required, sort of blending all these things together. Okay, so now that already gets you through the first 8 bars of the blues progression. It gets you all the way over here. So the only other chord in the whole progression is going to be F7, okay, F7. So for the sake of this, let's actually find the notes in F7 in this position. So first of all, I know that I could just actually take all these notes and I could just move them up a whole step like that. And that's going to give me my F7 chord because it's a dominant 7 chord a whole step away. But if we check this out, so first of all, actually, one thing I do like to do is bend actually this G up to A, which is in the F dominant 7 chord. So let's actually do that for 1 second. And then we're going to figure them out in the same position. So if you like leave the other notes that were there, I like to bend from this G up to A when we're on the 5 chord. So if I have F7, because that's bending into the 3rd of the F7 chord. Or you could also bend A flat up to A. So you're bending like what's normally in the minor pentatonic scale. And then you can play sort of your minor pentatonic stuff over it. Over the 5 chord, you have a lot of flexibility because the 5 chord's job is to create tension. But anyway, let's go back here. So let's actually go back to like our major and minor pentatonic areas. Let's just keep it simple over here. So if I'm looking at this whole box, I can find the notes F, A, C, and E flat really easily. So there's an A in between this A flat and this B flat. So let's go there. Let's get rid of the B flat for a second, even though you can kind of play that B flat on there. And then now D goes down a whole step to C. And now all of a sudden, look, check this out. I can also move this here. And let's get rid of that one. And then right here. So all of a sudden now, here is my F7 arpeggio that I have in this area. So again, you have to try to visualize that minor pentatonic that we had. And then also the major pentatonic. And then this F7 arpeggio. But, so one thing I love to do, a little lick, is to like go up into this A here and play this F over here. These 2 notes right there and those 2 strings, they sound super good together, like. And then when you go to the 4 chord afterwards in the progression, you can just move that actually both down a whole step. So let's try hearing what that sounds like. We're going to play over the 5 chord and see if we can highlight those notes right there. There's that lick that I just showed you in the 4 chord. And there was that bend that I showed you earlier. Bending G up to A, which is the same thing as this A that you see there on the 1st string as well. So this is why we need to know all of these things. If we know the triads and we know those 2 main scales, the minor pentatonic and the major pentatonic, that gives us a lot of different stuff to work with. And then what we want to do is to make sure that articulation is good. So let's do a little bit on blues articulation. So first of all, any of these approaches, we want to try bending through them. So bending from one note to the next, and especially when we're looking at the triads, bending into the triad notes. So let's see what it sounds like. I'm going to bend into some different notes, and I'm going to try to call out what I'm thinking about, which approach. So this is minor pentatonic. Now I just bent into D natural on that 1 chord. So lots of bending. There I bent. That was like a major bend. I bend up to D. There you go, I hit that F7 arpeggio. There I was bending into the E flat 7 arpeggio. So that's where you get this really cool bluesy sound, is if you start learning to bend into these notes that are not in the minor pentatonic scale. Most people are really good at just doing this one bend on the minor pentatonic scale. And maybe this one, that first one that I did. But most people don't know how to start bending into the different chord tones that are available. So make sure you practice bending from a note below one of those chord tones and seeing if you can start getting some more interesting stuff. You get those major bends in there, you get those minor bends in there, and get a healthy mix. That's what like really to me started helping me sound a little bit more legit when I was playing blues. So now another thing that we can do that I really love is this idea of like percussive raking on the guitar. So let's just go back to our good old minor pentatonic scale. Let's say I want to play any of these notes. I should learn how to mute all the strings below so I can go like this. So it's a combination of two things. Number one, it's a combination of the left hand and it's a combination of the right hand. So the left hand, sometimes I like to use this thumb here, and it's not because I'm just grabbing on the guitar like a baseball bat. It's because I'm actually using it to cover those strings. So there's that. And then, for example, if I'm using this finger to play a note on the third string, I'll use this finger to touch the fourth string, the string that's directly below / above, however way you want to think of it. It is a lower sounding string, so I consider it below. But every single extra finger that you have available, muting strings. And then finally, the right hand, using the side of the hand right here to place on the strings as well. And then we can combine that approach with the bending. So I can use that sort of rake idea. Right? You can use all of these different things in combination. That's the whole thing that I want you to get out of this video, okay? And then finally, the last really important articulation thing we need to talk about is sliding. So learning how to bend like that is definitely not easy. And I'm not the best in the world at it. So you go ahead and leave me a comment or whatever. I'm sure, I always get some kind of negative comment. By the way, if you leave negative comments, dude, it helps me out. So please leave me negative comments. But yeah, I'm no like Joe Bonamassa or whatever, but yeah, bending is hard. It takes a lot of practice for sure. Like getting used to the bending motion enough to be super free with that. Now, if you are having trouble with bending, well, you can just do a lot of sliding. And then sliding combined with that raking, it just sounds so good. And even if you get some of these bigger slides, like for example, right there, I was just sliding from that F to A flat on the 6th fret of the 2nd string, sliding up 3 frets. These kinds of things, even though I know we talked a lot about notes, guys, in this video, these things are probably more important. They are more important than the notes that you play. You can just wail on pentatonic scale, and if you have really good articulation and rhythm and phrasing, that's going to sound better than someone using all the perfect notes, but their articulation is super boring and their phrasing is super predictable and all that kind of stuff. So with that being said, let's jam out a little bit on this blues progression one last time before we wrap this video up. if you were confused by any of the stuff that I talked about in this lesson, whether it's building chords, building the triads, or the different scales I talked about and how to find them on a guitar fretboard, and you're interested in learning how to not only do these things that I talked about in this video, but be able to find all your triads, be able to master the guitar fretboard no matter what key it's in and no matter where on the fretboard you are, and I will walk you step by step the process of being able to figure out all of these things everywhere on the guitar fretboard, then make sure you head on over to jamsville.com right now and get yourself a copy of the Jamsville GPS Fretboard Fundamentals course. If you're fuzzy on any of this stuff, the course is going to be one of the best things that you've ever gotten to help your fretboard knowledge to get it to total mastery. Also, make sure you check out the Precision Pick from Dan's Guitar Store. This is not sponsored by them. They're just my absolute favorite picks that I have ever come across because they have unbelievable grip, and the tip with the beveled edge is so precise and accurate for playing all the stuff that I want to be able to play. So make sure you check the link in the description below and get yourself some precision picks from Dan's Guitar Store. And lastly, make sure you check out the Jamsville merch store for awesome Jamsville t-shirts, hats, sweaters, coffee mugs. I got all the Jamsville stuff and I'm using it. It looks freaking awesome, dude. I love this shirt. Not only does it look cool, but it fits super well and the fabric is really, really soft and it's one of the most comfortable shirts that I've ever worn. And I was so pleasantly surprised when I realized how good these shirts were. So I'm super happy with them, and I'm sure you're gonna love representing your Jamsville community out and about with your Jamsville merch. And until next time, make sure you subscribe, hit that bell notification button, hit the like button, do all the stuff. Just do all the stuff. So until next time, listen, learn, and jam.